It's pretty well accepted that rock climbing is a highly technical sport, so we thought we would sit down with a number of elite rock climbers to ask them how they developed such good technique and if they could give you any advice on how to develop your climbing technique. And my first question was, what is one climbing technique they think every rock climber should master?
I think a really important technique that is important for any climber is actually to really analyze and understand what constitutes the way in which they climb well. I don't feel like I could universally say a practical climbing technique that is relevant for anyone. A climber who is really dynamic and relies on a lot of explosive movements might really benefit from maybe training something like jump catches or something which really focuses on precision and contact strength, which might not be relevant for a climber who is maybe climbing something incredibly statically and locking really slowly between holds.
Well, I reckon the technique everyone should master would be keeping tension for extended moves. I think a lot of people are pretty prone to hooking and cutting on moves, when if you just sort of think about keeping tension and putting a bit more force through your toes, can save so much energy. To work on my own tension, I'd say I did quite a lot of just base core stuff, mostly with rings, and then just really thought about it on the board, getting on some steep ground, really thinking about drilling through your toes and just challenging yourself, getting a bit stretched out.
One thing that I think often people let get in the way of their climbing is their height, and more often than not I reckon this comes down to people not being very good at climbing at full extension rather than necessarily how tall they are. And being able to fully extend through the ankle, knee and hip, I think is one of the most valuable techniques, as it can allow you to do a lot more moves than you think may be possible for you. So actually I think there's two really good ways to train this, both one on the wall and one off the wall. Off the wall, you want to be looking at doing exercises that are a bit more core and hip based, that lead to you being in extension. So for example, you may have something like dish tucks, but focusing on just the lower part of your body, or things like deadlifts and rack pulls, where you're really driving through the legs. And then on the wall, looking to climb without cutting loose, I think is a great exercise that basically everyone can benefit from putting time into at the beginning of their sessions. And really just making sure you're maintaining contact, and as you get better, you can look to do this on worse footholds, so you're able to maintain tension even on really bad footholds.
One thing every climber should learn to do, which is kind of a technique, is learning the difference between relaxing on the wall and really trying hard. I know a lot of climbers, very experienced climbers, that fall into one category more than the other, and you notice it massively and it's hard to transition. For example, a lot of good route climbers, when we go bouldering, they really struggle to squeeze holds and really try it on every move. And once they start learning the moves, they do each movement okay, and they think they're going to do the problem. But as soon as they actually try to link it, they suddenly seem to fall off and they don't try as hard, but I can see they're not squeezing as hard as possible. Every move is hard, so they should be trying that hard. Vice versa, a lot of boulderers that try route climbing, or people that are better at bouldering go route climbing, they try really hard on every move and they don't learn to relax when it should be a lot easier. So I think the technique of understanding how much you need to contract on the wall and how hard you should try is something that you should really learn to do, and that just takes a lot of mental effort and it takes a long time to learn, but it's really, really valuable. For me, it's making sure that I spend a lot of time doing max efforts in each of the disciplines that I'm working in, or each of the different lengths of climbs I'm trying throughout even the training period or throughout the year. So a good example is I used to do a lot of fitness training in the winter, and then I would slowly transition into aerobic power to get ready for route climbing. But I would build up really gradually, and my body would be getting fitter and fitter and my performance would be getting better. But the transition to trying really hard when I was pumped wasn't quite translating very quickly, and it took a long time. So now what I do is I make sure I have hard route climbing throughout the entire training period, so that my body and my mind knows how to try hard when I'm really pumped, but also relax on the wall and get that balance right throughout that training season into the route climbing. The same with bouldering, trying short problems, long problems, just making sure at some point throughout the training season and throughout the year, I'm including some of that climbing into my training week. And it means that I'm really attuned to how hard you need to try on every different discipline all the time. Makes it much easier for me to perform.
One technique that I think everyone should master is visualization. This is really important and it's something that I use every week when I climb outside, every day before I climb outside. And I think just going through the process and the moves on a project can make the project feel so much more amenable and easy when you actually get there, because you feel like you've done the route or the boulder 15 to 100 times before. One method that I really have used recently to work on my visualization is every day before I go to bed, I run through the sequence on my project. I actually do this in a few different ways. I envisage it as if I'm climbing on the wall. I envisage it as if I'm looking at myself climbing on the wall, and I think these different variations gets a really holistic view of how it will feel when climbing on the wall. And quite often this means that I fall asleep really quickly, which is also a good advantage.
What I thought was really interesting about the answers to this question were that it wasn't just about technique, like developing your ability to maintain tension. It was also about other parts of your climbing, like your visualization or how to regulate your try-hard. This goes to show how multifaceted climbing skill is. It's more than just technique, it's about your psychology and your tactics. My next question was, how would you describe your climbing style and how does that help you perform to your best?
I'd say my natural climbing style is slow and controlled. I'm looking to diversify. I think it allows me to be really nuanced in how I hold holds and very specific in the subtleties of like body position and like kind of really precisely how I hold the holds. And I think my style allows me to do that because generally I'll find the points of stability and move quite slowly between them, and so almost like have the ability to slow the moves down to get the holds in such a way, or be able to like put my body into the position that I've like kind of learnt is best for the next move.
So I think my climbing style is pretty front on. Like I don't generally like drop knee or twist, but I'm much more flexible, like in an open hip way. But I think this is why I find having good tension so important as well. I really have to like claw in with my feet and have quite strong like hamstrings. The best thing about my style is it's quite quick. Like if I'm doing sort of long routes, I can normally blast out sections really quite fast because I'm just sort of punching between the moves. I don't have to worry too much about like getting into a really twisted position.
I would describe my climbing style as sort of strong and dynamic and more upper body focused than lower body, so a bit more front wheel drive. But I often struggle with hip flexibility, so I find that I can't necessarily make the most of a lot of different foot positions. So being able to compromise with that by using my upper body to pull me through moves has really benefited my climbing. That style really helps me perform at my limit because it gives me a clear idea of the kind of boulder problems that I'm going to get on well with, and I've definitely become a bit of a specialist in terms of my climbing and will pretty much do all my hardest things on steep overhang climbing with good edges so that I can pull really hard with my arms and then maintain tension with my feet on in-cut edges.
Generally powerful, dynamic. I would say I'm naturally good at coordination movements from my gymnastics background, and I'm much poorer at slow, long contractile positions like undercuts and trad climbing. And if I'm unconfident, that's probably the big thing. My climbing style, when it's at its best, is when I'm really confident, and when it's at its worst is when I'm trying to control the movements too much and I don't feel confident about the movements. When I pick climbs which most suit my natural style, that's when I perform really well because I enjoy the climbing a lot more and I feel really confident in those movements and I see progress really quickly. But to be honest, I spend a lot of time throughout the year not climbing in my style because I climb with my wife Maddie, who has a very different climbing movement pattern to me. But when I'm feeling really confident in my style and I feel really relaxed, I can use that in terrain that you probably don't think is that appropriate. For example, on vert, techie, sport climbing, I'll be far more dynamic and risky in my climbing, and that really translates to a good performance and more enjoyment. And it's very different to how most people would climb on that terrain, but for me, it translates much better.
I would say my climbing style is definitely more vertical crimping climbing, slightly overhanging. This probably suits my profile quite well, being like a technical slight climber. That's not to say I don't really enjoy the thuggy steep stuff, but this is just a style that I need to keep working and developing. For me, one technique that I really use all the time is drop knees. I think this is something that I've just used as a young climber and has really developed through my profile to an old climber, and you can't teach a dog new tricks, so I've just ended up using drop knees on everything and every route that I've done. Drop knees is definitely something that everyone should look to incorporate in their climbing. It just means that you can keep your hips close to the wall, keep a little bit of weight off your hands, and over maybe long routes or long boulders, this can equate to quite a lot of improvements in efficiencies.
I think the answers here go to show that you can't master every skill set in rock climbing. Even at the top of the game in our sport, people are still keeping a focus on one particular skill set. But all of these climbers are still finding a way to make that particular skill set work for them across multiple different terrains and styles of climbing. For example, Ollie using a bit more of a dynamic and high risk approach on more technical vertical terrain, or Jen using a square on style of climbing to move faster when she's at a crux in a sport route. My next question was, do you have any considerations for other climbers that might be your kind of build or have a similar style of climbing to you?
One special consideration that I think is useful for short climbers is that the chances are you're not going to necessarily be a generalized climber, or you're going to struggle with a more general approach, and you've got to get better at picking your problems. I think there's a couple of ways that you can kind of work on things to benefit this, and I think going either really static or really dynamic in the way that you climb can be a very beneficial way of doing this. So you get used to sort of either pulling in on really bad holds and being able to make the most of moving slowly, or being powerful and dynamic enough that you can make the fact that you're going to have to jump between holds work for you.
So for shorter climbs, I'd say try and get much stronger and more powerful legs. One thing that's paid dividends for me is I've got quite strong legs, and I really notice a massive difference if I can do a one-legged squat from really deep when I've had to do a bigger rock over than a taller climbing partner, or when I've had to do a bigger jump move. And usually, because I've got strong legs, I can make the distance up despite not being able to reach that. And then you work on your contact strength because your feet are normally having to come off the wall, or you're having to reach a lot quicker.
A top tip for someone of my profile would be to work with what you've got. You can't generally change your height or your arm span, so stop complaining about it and look to build your profile in other ways that will benefit your climbing.
The principle here that Ollie is bringing up is that if you're a particularly short climber or a particularly tall climber, or you just fall outside the norm somewhere, there are certain ways in which you can build up characteristics to help you level the playing field a bit. But what also turned up in the answers to this question is that if you do sit outside the norm in some of these characteristics, lean into it. Make sure that you can develop your climbing style and your movement so that you actually have a superpower that you can pull out the bag when it comes to finding the right boulders for you. This was a fairly open question. I just wanted to know if they had any good tips for learning technique.
My best tip for improving your technique is to apply a little bit of time at the start of every training session to decide what you want to work on, and then giving it that time with a lot of intent. So even writing it down on your hand or something and just saying, I'm going to spend 20 minutes in a constrained format, so on a specific type of wall, angle, movement pattern, and just really focus on that, and that'll really pay dividends throughout the entire session. So if you want to work on your footwork, just make sure you're really focusing on being precise with your feet for just 20 minutes. It will translate for the rest of the workout anyway, but giving it that time makes a huge difference. Again, if you want to work on compression style boulders and heel hooking, is for 20 minutes, go and find those boulders and really think about everything to do with that movement pattern. Where am I putting my feet? How am I holding the holds? What kind of movements am I going to and from those holds? And it'll really help you explore and learn how to use those techniques properly. But you've got to give it the time and the intention behind that session.
One tip I've got for helping people to learn good technique is repeating boulder problems or repeating routes that you've already done. I think everyone has a tendency to maybe just do one route or one boulder once because it's too much of a challenge to do it a second time. So I think repeating this, you'll learn really good efficiencies and movement. I also think a really good way of learning good technique is to climb outside. Generally the footholds here are a lot smaller, a lot more polished, and you have to put a lot more weight through your feet. So in doing this, you'll learn how to weight your feet properly and move efficiently on the wall.
Maybe one tip for learning technique would be, say you've just done a boulder at the wall, exactly how you would normally climb it, And then sometimes just getting on and just doing it a different way, or like climbing with lots of different people and seeing how they climb and seeing if you can actually do it the way they do it can be a really good way just to, you know, experiment with a different style of movement. It might not work every time for you, but it's a good way to add a few moves to your repertoire.
For some people, maybe the reason in which they love climbing is because they enjoy the practice of it. They enjoy the way it makes them feel, maybe they enjoy like the social elements of climbing. And to such a climber, I'd say, understand what you enjoy most about climbing and do more of that, because and I wouldn't encourage them to be like, oh yeah, work on these things if that's something they don't enjoy. But then for someone, say, who is doing competitions, they might absolutely hate coordination jumps. But I would say, if your goals are to do better in competitions, do loads of coordination jumps. And it might suck because you don't want to be doing it, but that will help you get better results.
I think what Ollie said in this section essentially goes to reinforce the idea of deliberate practice. Are you making a plan, and are you keeping it constrained so that you have a focus for your practice? Both Jen and Roz brought up the idea of repeating boulder problems or repeating climbs after you've done them. I think this is such an underrated piece of advice because it's often the second or third time you're climbing something that you can be more mindful of what you're doing with it, and you can be more reflective each time you come off that climb. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you've checked out the other videos in this series where we looked at finger strength and strength and conditioning for rock climbing. We're going to continue this video series with different topics as well, so make sure you've subscribed to the channel and you have that bell notification turned on. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.